It's been a while and I know it. I understand that. I really miss driving this thing. Oh, I don't miss that. This is my 1980 Volkswagen Rabbit pickup, and I've had this truck for well over 2 years at this point, which is kind of crazy, first of all. And in my ownership, it's had 2 engines, but it's only been drivable for like 3 months out of that 2 years. And 2 engines. Now last year I spent a considerable amount of time and money putting a 1.9 TDI, a PD TDI into this truck. When it was finished, I drove it for 2 or 3 months, and honestly the first drive I knew that I wasn't going to keep it because the engine just wasn't doing it for me. It immediately, it was tuned with a bigger turbo, and part of the problem was I had a 12-valve VR6 swapped 84 Rabbit, a tan 4-door, but it was so much fun to drive with that drivetrain. And throughout the entire swap here, I was comparing this to that, and I was just comparing apples to oranges because this engine was not a VR6. So I pulled it apart, sold everything, and here it is again, another undrivable paperweight. So fast forward like another 6 months to now, and it's finally time to engine swap it again. Now this time I'm extremely excited because I think this fixes a lot of the issues and things I didn't like with the TDI, and it also solves some of the problems with the VR6 as well, namely its weight. Because as cool as that tan Rabbit was, it drove like shit. It was so nose heavy, it didn't drive right, it didn't really stop that well either. So that car was a learning curve, but I want to take the heart and soul of that 84 Rabbit and give it to this. And I think there's only, at this point anyway, there's only really one option, only one engine option that makes the most sense, especially that's naturally aspirated. This is a 2.5 liter 5-cylinder engine out of a 2005 Volkswagen Rabbit, a Mark V engine, 175 horsepower or 215 with the swap tune and different manifold. This thing's really, really awesome, and I'm super excited to put this into this chassis. Technically, it has 0 miles on it. It's never actually been driven on the road. It has some run hours on it, but honestly, if you pull a valve cover, it looks brand new inside. There's no wear, there's no oil staining, there's nothing. It essentially appears as brand new. So this engine was an absolute find, but with that comes a pretty big problem, I guess, at least for the timeline's sake. This thing has to come completely apart. Because, as I've learned over the last 24 hours, I'm pretty sure this was like an Academy engine that they used for demo purposes. Basically, every single piece of hardware on this engine is loose, and that does include the head bolts. And that's as far as I know right now. I don't know if the rotating assembly's been, taken apart or is loose or anything like that. But the cylinder head definitely has to come off. The whole engine has to come apart so I can change the TTY hardware and put it back together with new gaskets. I'm hoping that's the only thing that I have to do to it. Otherwise, it's ready to go like it sits because it's pretty much brand new. Now, apart from the engine, I have a 1.8T transmission as well. This is an O2J unit. Now, what I'm gonna do to this is a TDI 5th gear swap, so a little bit longer ratio for the highway because it'll be really strung out with these small, tiny Rabbit wheels in 5th gear, even with the Mark IV era transmission. So this transmission plus a TDI gear set, this engine, and this truck should be a really fantastic combination. Now, before I go throwing a motor in this thing, I want to address something else first. Now, if you remember a few episodes back, I actually stole the brake, master, booster, and both front calipers from my 83 GTI because that car had nothing. And I knew that this thing was getting better parts anyway. And now it's time to do it. So, this is basically gonna get Mark III brakes, booster, master, calipers, rotors, and pads up front. The rears are gonna be stock Rabbit pickup. I don't see the benefit in putting discs in the rear. I don't think there really is one. Most of the heavy lifting done by the brakes is done by the two front wheels. So that's where my focus is going to be for now. I have already sourced a non-ABS booster, master, and front calipers. Now the front calipers are actually sort of special because this thing does have the stock Mark 1 spindles, and to adapt Mark 3 calipers to those spindles, you have to use 16 valve Scirocco caliper carriers, or like caliper brackets. Now you'll notice here, I actually have the original Mark 1 solid rotors on here still, but I also have the 16 valve calipers and carriers on here, and you can see the size difference from the original. I think these are like 9.4 inch rotors with these factory Mark III brakes. I think the rotors are like 10.5 inches or somewhere around there, 10.25, 10.5 inches. So that almost extra inch, plus they're all vented, will really help stopping a lot. Now the problem is, with the 16 valve brakes comes, I can no longer run my 13-inch wheels, which is kind of a shame because I love the look on a Rabbit. So we'll go with the next best thing, like maybe a Mark II steel wheel or something like that. Naturally, the angle of the dangle is a little different with that Mark III master cylinder. So much so that I had to rebend all the brake lines from front to back. Now this was also a good chance to get rid of the original weight biasing prop valve that early Rabbit pickups have from factory. It's not a great system, and especially 40 years down the road, at least mine didn't seem to do anything. Actually, it pretty much made it so I had no rear brakes, and they were very, very, very hard to bleed because very little fluid would make it past that valve. So by doing this, I could take that valve, throw it in the trash, and replace it with one from a later pickup, 81 to 84. So now that we're at a stopping point with the brakes, I want to take a closer look at this engine because, as I mentioned previously, it's been apart before. I'm not sure how many times, but that's kind of a scary concept. So we have to check a few things before I even think about putting this thing in the truck. Things like, you know, main bearing cap bolts and then rod cap bolts, and then we'll work our way up. I know the cylinder head bolts are loose. The only nice thing about this is the bolts that are loose are like finger tight. So there's not really much guessing as to like, I wonder if this has been out before, because they didn't even try to like tighten the stuff back down to. So I'm gonna save us some time here. Every single little bit of hardware on this engine was loose. Every single thing. Rods, mains, everything was mixed up, and the cherry on top was the oil pump was missing. That oil pump alone cost more than another junkyard motor, so this was a pretty easy call to make. Even if I had all the gaskets and hardware that would put this one back together, I never really would have trusted it like an engine out of a wrecked car that we know ran. So I turned to LKQ and bought this, a much newer version of the exact same engine, only this time out of a 2013 Jetta. Okay, fine. Maybe it wasn't that epic, but at least we've got a motor now. Well. The FedEx man paid me a visit today, and it's all stuff that I've been putting off buying for this because I didn't have an engine. But now, all of that has changed thanks to my friends at LKQ. No, this is not a sponsored promotion. I paid full price and full shipping and full tax and everything for this engine, but honestly, it's the best one I've bought yet. And I totally rolled the dice, and I think, at least it looks like, I totally lucked out. So anyways, let's open some boxes. This one's fragile, I can't do that. And this box weighs like 30 pounds. Yeah. Where's my knife? I don't even remember what half of this is. Let's see. Rock Auto magnet, most importantly. It is a Buick wagon. That thing is sick as. This is a black, unmarked box. It's a good sign. These are actually front brake hoses for a Vanagon. The rear brake lines on a late pickup, so 81 to 83, have these longer hoses that go from just above the axle on the chassis, and they swing down around to the axle. Now, the 79 build and 80 trucks don't have that. I'm updating to these brake hoses, and now that I have a motor, I can justify putting them in. Crankshaft front seal set. What else we got? What else we got? Oh, yes, of course. Valve cover gasket. Seal. Input shaft guide sleeve / input shaft seal. So this is what that looks like. It's tiny, but the throwout bearing rides on this collar, and the back has the seal for the input shaft. If you ever have your O2J out of your Mark IV, or if it's a swapped car like this is a great thing to replace, and it's like 12 bucks. So it's a very worthwhile thing to pick up. Now, the last piece in this box is the other output flange seal. Let's see what we got here. I have a feeling I know what this is, and this is something very critical to our engine swap. So that'll be good to have finally. But first, this L-ring box. I believe this is a rear main seal for the 07K. It is. This is a Bosch 044 style fuel pump. This is basically a stock CIS Rabbit fuel pump, but this is good enough to run our 2.5 5-cylinder. Plus, I can run this in the factory fuel like pump basket that comes with a gasoline Rabbit from factory. So yeah, there it is. These things are pretty quiet. They move tons of fuel and they last a pretty long time. And the best part, from Rock Auto, this pump was like $65. Mally, intake seals for the 07K. I will have the intake off, so it'll be good to replace these while I am in there. So intake seals, and finally, this right here. Ugh, this is the clutch kit. Aha. Yes, this is the end cover seal for an O2J. And I bought this not because the one that I have leaks, but because I'll have the end cover off to change out the 5th gear set, which I will be doing here in just a little bit. So the 1.8T trans that I have, I believe has a 0.83 overdrive gear. Oh, I might be wrong. I'm shooting in the dark there. So I actually have a gear set from the Grumman because I put a 0.658 in the Grumman. So I have the original TDI 5th gear from that transmission to put in the 1.8T transmission. So we'll have the end cover off, and that's a good time to change this gasket. So that's why I've got that. So there you go. Wow. That was a lot of money for that small pile of parts. Before we get to working on the transmission and upgrading the 5th gear and resealing the case, I do want to show you what I've been talking about with the brakes. Bring it down here and just touch up on exactly what I'm talking about. So, all right, it's very dirty down here, so just keep that in mind. So the brake lines shoot along here alongside the gas tank, and then they terminate here at this weird little changeover that I made out of some scrap steel that I had laying around. So this is where those long Vanagon brake hoses actually go from the chassis side and they loop down to the axle. So let's go back here so you can actually see what I'm talking about. The brake lines come back and then they meet the hoses here, and then they loop down around to this steel line down to the brake drum. You can see that's the idea. So anyways, I'm gonna finish up, install the hoses, and then this back here is all done, and that's exciting. This thing is muddy inside. Holy crap. Wow, that is dirty. So the plan of attack here is to take off the selector, the shift fork, take that out, get that out of the way, and then we'll pull out these two T60 Torques that hold the gears on, and then we'll heat up each gear one at a time, and we'll pull them off with a 2-jaw puller that I got from Harbor Freight. There's really not much to this. So yeah, let's get into it. Just a little side note here, make sure you clearance the very top of the bell housing before you mate the engine and transmission, otherwise it'll clearance itself, and you don't want that to happen because it will ruin the upper chain cover. So I got quite a bit done yesterday on the engine and transmission, so much so to the point where I'm able to put it in today. So before I do that, let's recap real quick what I did and why I did it. So the transmission got new output flange seals, new output flanges to fit the new swap axles, a longer 5th gear out of a TDI transmission. It also got a new input shaft seal and bearing sleeve. So the engine got a vacuum pump block off plate, so that's deleted and gone. It has a clutch, flywheel, and pressure plate from a TDI. So on either end of the engine, we have S&P swap brackets to fit a Mark 1. And apart from that, I didn't do anything to the engine. So honestly, this thing was so clean when it came off the truck that I'm really not worried about it. And I feel like I would cause more issues by trying to fix it than I would just leaving it alone. We're gonna lift up the front of the truck, slide the engine underneath, lay it back down, and then we'll take our hoist and pull the engine up into place coming up from the bottom. That's the easiest way to take engines in and out of a Mark 1. And of course it goes for anything swap-wise, so VR6, 07K, ABA, TDI, all the classics. Yep. Loop those on there. This. Oh boy, we've got a ways to go. There we go. So that's the fuel pump and Mark 6 filter installed on the bottom side of this Rabbit. This should be enough to run the 2.5 no problem. So I'm hoping that nothing leaks. And to check that, I'm gonna throw 1.5 gallons of gas into the old diesel tank.
in an attempt to kind of wash it out, but also to check for leaks and see just how this all works and how loud it is, how loud the pump is, and just kind of feel this thing out a little bit because I'm not sure exactly what it's going to be like.
So now that I've got the fuel system sort of roughed in, I want to shift my focus back to the engine bay and start thinking about the wiring harness for the engine specifically. So this truck never had an ECU from the factory. So there's not really a good spot to put an ECU for a newer engine like this. So we kind of have to make one. So our ECU will be up here in this corner, the passenger side corner of the rain tray. And then the engine harness runs along here, through the rain tray, down along this inner frame rail, and you can see it kind of following the body harness here. And then ultimately it's gonna run down here across the top of the starter and then up through this like cavity in here between the intake manifold and the timing cover. I do have some exciting news on top of all of this. This manifold is coming off for the wiring harness, but it's not going back on. Huge thanks to my friends over at Integrated Engineering for sending me this short runner intake for the 2.5 liter 07K engines. It fits the Mark V and Mark VI platform cars without power steering. And they also sent me this, another little piece to kind of dress up our engine bay. This is their solid billet aluminum valve cover. This thing is absolutely gorgeous and should really add a lot, especially when it comes to getting rid of this ugly plastic OEM hardware. So they ship it with a license plate frame and a koozie, and of course some Integrated Engineering stickers and decals. Oh, that's really awesome. Heck yeah. Heck yeah. And then this right here is it. I might need two hands to get the bubble wrap off. Oh wow. There it is. So there it is, the short ram intake versus the factory OE plastic intake.
Exposed and hollow, this is your one true life.
At this point, it was already late June, and I had a deadline, a personal goal to have this truck at Markwood Madness, which gave me approximately 3 weeks to finish what I had started. The engine didn't run, the wiring wasn't finished, the cooling system was still in pieces, and the exhaust was just in a box on the floor. I definitely had my hands full and a lot to figure out before I could drive the truck for the very first time, let alone make a 6-hour drive from the middle of Ohio to the eastern side of Pennsylvania. Point now where we can finally start this thing for the very first time. I'm excited. This is huge. Fuel system's primed. I mean, there's nothing left to do but twist the key and see if she goes. So let's just see what happens. it for a bit. Woo! A little noisy there at first, but you'll have that. Otherwise, this thing seems to run really, really well. Yes! Yes!
It's in my head, not in my heart. Bouncing thoughts from wall to wall. Will I ever find what I'm looking for? There's no way to conceal it. I still carry you around.
Well, I can't believe it, but the moment is finally here. It's time for our maiden voyage in the Rabbit. I honestly forgot just how low this thing sits to the ground. It's kind of hilarious, but wheels are tight, axles are tight, nothing's leaking, you know, terribly. Let's just go for a drive and see what this thing does. There's some sketchy stuff going on with this truck, like the gas pedal's not actually fastened down to anything, it's just kind of laying there. Yeah, I don't know. We're just gonna go for it. I think I actually haven't even tested the clutch yet to know if it works. So we're gonna find out. Okay, fires right up. And it moves. Awesome. Wow. This is so much different than the old TDI. AC compressor delete pulley is very talky. My AC compressor delete pulley was making a terrible chattering sound at certain points in the rev range, which made driving around town a pretty nerve-wracking experience, especially for the first time. Yeah, that pulley gets going. I do not like the way that sounds. Unfortunately, because of that AC delete pulley, we didn't make Madness. But I did just get back from Rabbits on the Rocks, which is a very similar show, and it was almost 975 miles in total. And this thing did amazing. I really can't fault it one bit. My friends and I drove out together in a group of 4 cars, and we were averaging 65 to 70 miles an hour, and this thing got 35 miles to the gallon at that speed. Coming home, I was by myself and went about 75, and at that speed, it was closer to 30, but I'm pretty happy either way. This thing makes tons of power and sounds amazing. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Motul and Integrated Engineering for all the parts. It's been an absolute blast so far, and I can't wait to show you what it sounds like. So, without further ado,